Good morning everyone, I'm very excited for this video because I am going to be showing you, well, not showing you because I don't have any of the books with me, but telling you all of the books that I have rated 5 stars. I'm pretty stingy with my 5 stars. When I rate something 5 stars, it's because I genuinely love it. Another thing that constitutes a 5-star book for me is something that I can't really quite capture because I don't really know what it is. I call it the feeling. I don't know how to describe that feeling, if it energizes me, if it makes me want to reread it, if it makes me want to tell everyone about it. That is a 5-star to me. Some of these books I wouldn't rate 5 stars now, but that's probably because I'm 24 and when I read them I was like 15, but I think it's important to honor how I felt at the time because I still think they're great. I just wouldn't maybe rate them 5 stars. Without further ado, I'm just gonna get into the books. So the first books that I rated 5 stars, I'm just gonna say the whole series because they come as one to me, and that is of course Harry Potter. I think I started reading Harry Potter when I was 10. I just remember it was the summer when my family from Australia came over to visit, but I remember just reading The Philosopher's Stone on my mum's bedroom floor. I just remember my auntie commenting on the fact that I was reading so much as a child, and that is because this whole world that was created I felt a part of. I used to read it every single year around Christmas time because that's like what I associate Harry Potter with, but since wanting to read loads of other books I decided that that's probably not a good idea. So if you're one of those people who has only seen the films, I actually recommend to read the books as well because there are things that have been missed out in the movies that I think really add to the stories. I did go to the Warner Brothers Studios for my 13th birthday. I have the extended editions of all of the films with like all of the behind the scenes stuff. I cry every time I finish them all. Harry Potter just has a very special place in my heart. It is such a shame that the author is who she is. I don't support the author, but I also can't ignore the fact that I grew up with those books and the films. We don't talk about the author, pretend she's not there. Enough about Harry Potter. I think it speaks for itself. So those are the first 7 books on my 5-star list. And the first book, which I think that I wouldn't have on this list now, but I adored it at the time, is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. It follows the story of a boy called Charlie who is writing letters to a friend, and through those letters we hear about his coming of age story. He is quite a shy boy and lives on the edges of his high school, but then he meets these 2 people and they take him into their lives, bring him to parties, and he experiences like his first kiss. It's all very connected to every teenager, and even if you haven't experienced all of those things during high school, I feel like the relatability of just not feeling like you properly fit in anywhere, that is just something that really stood out for me. There is a dark twist at the end, so I would read trigger warnings for that. It was definitely during my Tumblr days that I read this book. It was very popular, like along with The Fault in Our Stars and Looking for Alaska. I would repost pictures of it on my Tumblr. But yeah, that is a great book. Also a great film. So yeah, give that a go. It's been 30 degrees for like the past 3-4 days, which in a country that has no air conditioning is really fucking hard, and I can't open the window because it's too loud. And I'm just having a great time. So I'm sorry if I'm out of breath and really sweaty. On to the next book. Again, another book that has been turned into a film, and for good reason, although I didn't like the film as much as I liked the book. I just feel like the casting might have been a little bit wrong. That book slash film is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. I think one of the reasons why I read this book was actually because it was in Zoella's book club. It's a YA novel about a boy and a girl who actually meet on the ledge of like their school roof. They kind of save each other and become friends through a project that they're set about discovering natural wonders in their state. And so the 2 of them end up exploring their state together. Their friendship develops and maybe it comes a little bit more. But the thing that kind of makes it a little bit dark, the girl Violet, her sister passed away recently and she's really struggling through that, so she's just trying to get through school. Whereas Finch, the boy, he's like super outgoing and kind of crazy. Everyone at school thinks he's really weird. Inside, he's very like deeply sad. It has an incredibly gut-wrenching ending. Please, please, please read the trigger warnings because it's got very sensitive subjects, but I think it's written in a really great way. This is definitely one of the books that reminds me that just because it's a young adult novel doesn't mean that I, as an adult, can't enjoy them. The next book that I've rated 5 stars is also truly devastating. There's a little theme here, apparently. This book is called The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. This book will tear you to pieces. It's about these 2 little boys in Afghanistan. One of them is the son of a rich man, and then the other boy is the son of the servant who serves their family. Basically, there's a kite flying competition, and one day the boys are in the competition and something really terrible happens to the servant's son, and the wealthy boy sees it happening but doesn't do anything about it. He runs away because he's scared. From that point on, both of their lives just kind of change very dramatically. Then years later, he decides that he wants to go and find Haseen, and then some other things ensue. I don't want to spoil anything. Cried at this book. It's really devastating. It's very violent. Trigger warnings again. But one of the main things that I actually took away from this book is not really much to do with the story itself, but to do with how Afghanistan was described before all of the war. I think that's something that us in the west of the world do not get to see at all, because the media loves to show us war because it gets them clicks, it gets them views. So when I read this book, it just opened my eyes and reminded me to not take everything at face value. It's also a fantastic story. The next book that I read that I rated 5 stars was Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aceman. I read this in 2017. God, that was a long time ago. I think I might have read it because I saw the film was coming out and I really fancied Timothée Chalamet. Still do. Don't know why I use past tense. Again, another book that made me bawl my eyes out. Like, I remember choking on my tears. I was sitting on my sofa at home and I was choking. It's about a young boy in Italy and his father is a professor. Every summer, the dad has a student come over from America, I'm pretty sure, and he teaches him through the summer. The student kind of integrates into the family, they have meals together, they hang out together. This leads to the young boy Elio and the student Oliver to form a relationship, and he's such a teenager about it. Like, he kind of gets a little bit obsessed, feels so uncomfortable around Oliver. All of these little coming of age, like, teen things that happen to pretty much everyone. God, it's just so beautiful. It also has one of my favorite quotes ever in it, and that quote goes, "We rip out so much of ourselves to be cured of things faster than we should, that we go bankrupt by the age of 30 and have less to offer each time we start with someone new. But to feel nothing so as not to feel anything, what a waste." That has always stuck with me. It's definitely one of my favorite books ever. I know there's a lot of controversy about it because Elio is 16, I believe, and Oliver, the student who comes over, is 20 something. And you know, personally, as a 24-year-old, I would never go even near a teenager, let alone a 16-year-old. It is a bit weird, but we have to think this is set in the 80s, but also in Italy. I'm pretty sure you're legally an adult at the age of 16. If it was set in present day, I think it could be pretty predatory, but because of the context, I don't think it is. Let me know your thoughts on that. Oh God, can I take this off? I'm just not built for heat. I'm really struggling right now. Let's move on. Next book that I want to tell you about has had its resurgence in the past like year or two because of TikTok, and that is They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. I read this book in 2018. I didn't know anything about it before I started it, and I think that helped me. So many people now have read it and are disappointed by it, probably because it's been so hyped up and it's just shot their expectations too high. The book is set in a world where something called Death Cast can call you on any day and tell you that you're gonna die that day. They don't tell you what time you're gonna die, nothing like that. You've just got to live that day like it's your last. And this happens for 2 boys. I think there was some other type of app or forum or something that you can write into and be like, hey, it's my last day, does anyone want to like hang out? These 2 boys end up meeting up. They just form a really lovely relationship, and along the way there's lots of times where you're like, oh my god, they almost just died, but they didn't. You're constantly thinking like, who's gonna die first? Are they gonna die together? I don't know how people could not like it. I haven't read the second book yet. I know it came out like last year, but now that I'm remembering how much I loved this one, I really want to go and pick it up. Next up, I don't see nearly as many people talking about it as I think they should be, and that book is Warcross by Marie Lu. Again, read this in 2018. I was on my YA hype. This is like a sci-fi dystopian. It's set in the future when virtual reality games are like incredible, and there's this thing called the Warcross games where different players all compete against each other in the virtual reality. It's kind of like the Olympics of the future, and there's a girl called Emika who is a bounty hunter who tracks down players who bet on the Warcross games illegally. She's not making loads of money at this job, and so she decides to hack herself into the Warcross games to make some quick money, but without meaning to, she actually hacks herself like into all of the action so that everyone around the world sees her just like appear out of nowhere. But instead of getting arrested for it, the owner of the games, who's like this mega billionaire, really hot guy, he basically wants her to become a spy for him within the games because he's had a bit of a security problem and he wants her to find out how. There's a bit of a romance on the side, but it's mainly focused on the games and like all of the action and adventure. I felt really immersed in the world, which sometimes I do actually find quite difficult with sci-fi and fantasy. There is a bit of a twist towards the end. I will say the second book in the series was a bit of a letdown. It was good, but it definitely didn't live up to the first book. I'm actually gonna have to put my hair up now because I'm sweating. How do people do this in other countries that are just hot all the time? I'm so uncomfortable. Right, let's just move on. The next book is super famous. I would say more people watched the TV program than have read the book because the books are humongous, absolute doorstops, every single one of them, and that is A Game of Thrones. I read the first book in 2018 and then I started the second book and still haven't finished it. The detail is unmatched. I've never read a book that has such intense world building, but because of this, Game of Thrones is definitely intimidating. The amount of characters can be very confusing. That's why it took me so long to read, and that's also why I struggled to read the second one. One day I will finish them all because my mum did buy me the whole book set, but yeah, it will definitely take me some time. The story itself is just incredible. The amount of planning that must have gone into writing a book like that, where there are so many characters and different plot lines and they all intertwine and all come together at the end. I could never. If you don't know what Game of Thrones is, it's basically kind of like a fantasy medieval world where there are lots of different houses at war with each other, and then within the houses there's loads of lies and deceit, a lot of sex. It's very explicit. There's so much death. There's also dragons, which is fun. I highly recommend watching the TV program as well. On to a book that I don't think has received as much hype as I think it should have. I haven't seen it on TikTok at all, I don't think, but that is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. I actually just found out that there's 2 more books. So I have read Truly Devious, The Vanishing Stare, The Hand on the Wall, but I've not read The Box in the Woods or 9 Liars. That's great for me because I rated the first book 5 stars. I do think the second and third aren't as good as the first one. I think my favorite thing about this series is the setting that it takes place. It's at a boarding school for kind of gifted children. Each child has their own speciality, whether that's journalism or music. And for our main character, Stevie Bell, her speciality, I guess, is mysteries and being a detective. And at this school, it is set in the mountains. There's like a map at the front of the book, which I always love. There's lots of secret passageways. There's lots of different houses where the children stay, and within their house, that's kind of like their family, I guess. Years ago, the principal's daughter got kidnapped and a letter was left signed by someone called Truly Devious, and the case was never solved. However, Stevie Bell wants to solve it. Truly Devious makes a surprise return and another death occurs at the school. She's trying to solve 2 crimes. There's also lots of other things going on with her friends, and I think the mysteries are really well written. It's just so satisfying. I actually think I'm going to buy the next 2 books and do a reading vlog on those. Let me know if you want to see a video like that. On to the next one. The next book that I rated 5-star, I think, again, either you love it or you hate it, and that book is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I read this book whilst I was traveling. I was in Sweden. It was midsummer, and I remember sitting on the side of the river on a bench. The sun was out. I was opposite this massive park and there was this massive river in front of me. I was just reading my book and I just felt so content. I despised the film. It was so bad. I feel like they changed so much about the book. It just felt wrong. The book I loved. It's another sci-fi virtual reality. The world is pretty much lived in virtual reality rather than in real life, and basically the guy who created the virtual reality world dies, and upon his death he sets out a challenge for all of the players, and the prize at the end of the challenge is to actually become the owner. So of course millions of people are trying to play this game. What's fun about it is it's kind of 80s themed. There is this guy called Wade and he is obsessed with the creator of the VR world. So he's pretty much dedicated his whole life to learning about the 80s. He stumbles across the first clue and it gets to the point where people are even like trying to kill him in real life. They form alliances and kind of complete tasks together. And then there's also like so much going on in the real world as well. I think it's an amazing book. I love a book with puzzles and I think you should read it too. The next book that I read and rated 5 stars, I actually have read twice, and that book is called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sayens. The second book came out last year, the year before, and that's when I reread this book because I had forgotten pretty much everything that happened, and I didn't love the second one as much as the first one, but it was still great. The story is about, I think both of the boys are Latino. They find each other, they start a really lovely friendship that kind of turns into a bit more than that. Quite traumatic events happen along the way. There was an assault. It's quite an emotional book. I think I cried the first time. I don't think I cried the second time. I remember just feeling so connected to their relationship. It was just so sweet. The next book that I want to talk about is called I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes. This is a book that my dad recommended to me. Every book that he's ever recommended I have absolutely loved. It is a crime mystery thriller book all about this, I think he's a retired spy, I can't remember. There are 4 different crimes that happened spread out across the world, but they all interlink. I think the first one that he was called to was a woman's body found in a hotel, but all of her identifying features had been burned off with acid. There's also a man who has been beheaded in Saudi Arabia. A Syrian biotech expert found eyeless in Damascus, and then smouldering human remains on a remote mountainside in Afghanistan. Somehow all of these things link together. It's very complicated, but it's also so satisfying when all of these different plots link together. It's just like, that's perfect. I can't really say much else without giving it away, so make sure it's on your list if you too love crime fiction. My next 5-star book is, again, one of those ones where you either love it or you hate it. It was super big on TikTok like last year, and that book is Normal People by Sally Rooney. This story is about 2 teenagers at school. Connell is a sporty boy at school and he has lots of friends, whereas Marianne doesn't. She's really smart though, but she does have a troubling home life. Connell's mum is a maid, I think, for Marianne's family, and that's where they kind of meet. So it's a coming of age story. There's a lot of miscommunication slash no communication at all. During school, there's a lot of the kind of very normal teen things like going to prom, going out clubbing, getting drunk, all of that. And then they leave school and go to university, and so all of this follows them there. It's just a very real and raw look into two people's lives from when they're teenagers into adulthood. One of the main things I think that a lot of people didn't like is that Sally Rooney doesn't use quotation marks, so you don't actually know when someone's speaking aloud or just in their head. A lot of people don't like that because they find it confusing, but for me and a lot of other people, it just emphasizes the fact that Connell and Marianne have such communication issues. It's kind of like they are talking inside their heads all the time, but never getting across what they want to say to each other. There's no glamour, and I think some people expect more of a romance rather than just two kids trying to figure stuff out. Definitely check the trigger warnings for this. Also, once you finish the book, you have to watch the program. I'm so hot. The next book I actually have with me, the one and only book that I have with me, and that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So many people have read it and were devastated by it, so much so that they regret reading it. They think it's the worst book written because why would someone ever write something so traumatic? But I don't know, I didn't cry once. I've always watched crime shows with my mum and listened to true crime podcasts, so I'm kind of desensitized to a lot of things. I think a lot of this stuff happens to people all over the world. Maybe not every single thing to one particular person, but it's definitely widely experienced. I actually think it's an important book to read because it helps you understand other people's lives and what they go through. I do want to emphasize that if you are not the type of person that can withstand reading about a lot of trauma, don't read it, because I've seen some very visceral reactions to it. But you could be like me and it could become one of your favorite books ever. It's a risk and you can choose whether you want to take it or not. A little bit about the story. A Little Life is about 4 young men who move to New York for university. So the artist, the actor, the architect, and the lawyer. Each of them have very different personalities, different home lives, but as you get into the book, you come to realize Jude's life is kind of the main pull between all 4 of them. His childhood and pretty much his whole life actually is just, oh, it's so unfair. You come to love the characters so much and then these horrible things keep happening to them. Overall, it's about friendship, it's about love, growing up, dealing with trauma. I think it's an amazing book, but again, please be careful with it. I might be going a little bit delirious because it is like 25 degrees and all of the words that are coming out of my mouth have lost all meaning. Next book is another recommendation from my dad. That book is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. It's about a young man in Japan, in Tokyo, who is at university and he is devoted to his girlfriend, but their relationship is kind of marked by their mutual best friend's death. So along with that, and also just the responsibilities of being like a young guy at university, he starts reaching out to other people, one of them including another woman, and she also has her own thing going on in the background that is making life really difficult for her. Basically, everyone's struggling. There's a lot of sexually explicit scenes. Again, check the trigger warnings for other things that happen. It's a Murakami book, so it's very misogynistic. He's really bad at writing women. He tends to focus on their breasts a lot and also makes them do things that a man would want them to do, but then they really wouldn't do themselves. It sounds like it's a really bad story because of that, but it's not like super distracting from the story. I did have to physically stop reading the book at one point and go back and reread the page because I was like, wait, did that really just happen? There's quite a few shocking parts to the story, but I really enjoyed it and gave it 5 stars. The next book that I rated 5 stars is actually like multiple stories all in one that all link together. Again, I love when separate plots all come together at the end. There's just something so satisfying about that. And this book is called Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I cried at the end of this book. I do tend to rate books 5 stars if they can make me cry, because not much can make me cry. That's a lie. I cry a lot nowadays. But I mean books. All of these stories come from different perspectives of different types of women from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races. It is mostly Black British women, which are stories that rarely get to be told, so this is a very important book to have. There's 5 more books. Guys, I think I'm going crazy. Next book, again, recommended by my dad. This book is called The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Very, very famous series. It is a story about a journalist who has been employed by this super rich guy to uncover the mystery of his missing granddaughter. So it's one of those mysteries that happens within an enclosed area. So this rich family have their own little island, and then one day the girl just goes missing. Michael Blomkvist, the journalist, he meets a woman who is quite the character. Her name is Lisbeth, and she is in the tech world, but she's also a hacker, and so they kind of form a little team. There's also so much going on behind the scenes within both of their lives. So yeah, it's kind of 3 plots: his, hers, and then the families all intertwining. Please check the trigger warnings because Lisbeth goes through a lot. The next book I actually haven't heard anyone talk about apart from my old flatmate who I lived with in Belfast, and she recommended me this book called Snowflake by Louise Nealon. I would say if you like Sally Rooney's writing, then you will probably like Louise Nealon, because it's about a girl from a more humble background who goes to Trinity College, so she doesn't really feel like she fits in there at all. Her mum has some mental health issues. Her brother is an alcoholic. There's a lot going on at home on her farm. So when she goes to Trinity, I think she thinks she's gonna kind of escape all of that and have a great time, but it doesn't really work out that way. But something tragic happens at home on her farm that kind of upends her life and doesn't make her future as certain as she thought it would be. The writing style was so beautiful. If you like Sally Rooney, I really recommend Snowflake. Complete change of pace now. The next book that I'm going to recommend is 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. 6 of Crows is set in the Grishaverse, which is a world built by Leigh Bardugo. It's within the same world as the trilogy of Shadow and Bone, which I've also read. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't like it. Whilst I was reading it, I was thinking, yeah, this is okay. But now when I look back at it, I'm like, I actually didn't like that. Even though it's within the same world, they are very different stories, and I much prefer 6 of Crows. It's about a group of people in a place called Ketterdam. This super rich guy employs them to perform this heist, and if they complete it, then he's gonna pay them like loads of money. There's a lot of action, a lot of fantasy and magic, but along the way, obviously things go wrong. They get past it, something else goes wrong. And if you don't trust me, trust TikTok. TikTok says it's a great book, and that's why I bought it. The second to last book that I want to talk about is called Kim Ji-young, born 1982, and this was written by Cho Nam-ju. So it follows this woman from when she's younger, and it describes all of the times in her life where she has struggled purely because she's a woman. There are lots of things in today's society that are against women, just inherently, for no reason, and this book details it perfectly. It was relatable in many ways, and I also learned some new things that are probably more specific to Korea and like the traditions around how women should behave there. But the way it all starts out is really interesting. I believe it's when she's pregnant, she starts mimicking these voices of other women who are dead and alive, but she doesn't even know them. So her husband sends her to a psychiatrist, and that is where her own story is told. It's very relatable, it's very frustrating, but I think it's a book that not only women should read, but everyone should read. Oh my gosh, the last book, and it is called If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This was another book that TikTok actually inspired me to read. So the story starts on the day of release of a man who has spent 10 years in prison for a murder that he may or may not have committed, and the detective who was on his case comes to visit him. They have a big conversation about what really happened, and that is how the story is told. So the man who's just come out of prison, Oliver, he went to university and he specifically went for acting, and him and all of his friends, they put on a play, but one of the guys is just like a really horrible person and everyone kind of has something against him, and one day he turns up dead, and the whole story is about what happened to him. If you liked The Secret History by Donna Tartt, then you will like this book. Dark academia, mystery, thriller, really complicated relationships, secrets and lies. And this one is centered around a Shakespeare play. That was kind of interesting because the play mimics what's happening in real life. So that is the last book that I've rated 5 stars. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought about them. Do you agree with me? Do you not? I hope you enjoyed this video and got some inspiration of what to read next. And if you want to see more reviews and bookish things from me, then you can follow me on my Instagram, my TikTok and my Goodreads account. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.